like to introduce the moderator of today's panel, Susan Harris.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Susan Harris, the editorial director of Words Without Borders. WordsWithoutBorders.org is an organization devoted to the promotion of literature and translation. One of our major projects is our magazine, WordsWithoutBorders.org, on the web. We are delighted to be here at this event, and we thank our co-sponsors, Scandinavia House and the Blue Metropolis Foundation of Montreal. Today we are going to be talking about writing in and about a minority language. We have 3 writers from Quebec, 1 from Ukraine, and 1 from Catalonia. Immediately to my left is Nadine Bismuth. Her first book, the short story collection Fidelity Doesn't Make the News, won the Prix des Libraires du Québec and the Prix Riabchuk. In 2004, she published Scrapbook, a parody of autobiographical fiction. In 2009, her second short story collection, Are You Married to a Psychopath?, was a finalist for the Governor General's Prize. She also writes for television and film. To her left is Dominique Fortier. Dominique Fortier holds a PhD in literature from McGill University, is an editor and literary translator. On the Proper Use of Stars, her debut novel, was first published in Quebec and was shortlisted for the Governor General's Award for Fiction, the Prix des Libraires du Québec, the Grand Prix Culturel Archambault, and the Prix Senghor. It is being adapted for the screen. To Dominique's left is Nicolas Dickner. Nicolas Dickner published his first... Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, my sightline is obviously flawed here. I apologize. Please forgive me. To Dominique's left is Mykola Riabchuk. He is of Ukraine. He is a senior research associate at the Ukrainian Center for Cultural Studies in Kiev, also a member of the editorial board of Kritika magazine and the Journal of Southeastern Europe. He has published poetry, short stories, literary criticism, and essays. His works have been translated into 18 European languages and have been distinguished with many awards, including a Polish-Ukrainian Kapitula Award, the Antonovich Prize, and the Benemerito. Now, to Mykola's left is the aforementioned Nicolas Dickner. Nicolas Dickner from Quebec published his first collection of short stories, The Encyclopedia of the Small Circle, in 2002. His novel Nikolsky won the Anne Hébert Prize, among others. His novel Apocalypse for Beginners was published in 2009. He is a columnist and writer for the weekly newspaper Voix. And to Nicolas' left is Teresa Solana from Catalonia. She is a translator from Barcelona. She directed the National Translation Center in Spain for 7 years and now devotes her time to writing her own novels and translating them into Spanish. Her first novel, A Not So Perfect Crime, won the 2000 Brigada 21 Prize for Best Noir in Catalan, and A Shortcut to Paradise, her second, was shortlisted for the 2008 Salambo Prize for Best Novel in Catalan. Her works have been translated into several languages. So we have 3 Quebec authors, 1 Ukrainian and 1 Catalonian. And I thought we would open our discussion by asking the Quebec writers. Now, all of you work in what's considered a minority language in your country, but you actually live in a majority language in your respective cities, in Montreal, in Kiev, in Barcelona. How conscious are you of writing in a minority language? Do you think of yourself as a writer in a minority language? Dominique?
I don't think that, for my part, I'm not that conscious about the fact that French is a minority language, because, as you said, all 3 of us live in the province of Quebec, where the vast majority of people speak French, and we live in Montreal, which is a bilingual city, but where I would say the majority of the population is French. So The French institutions are quite old and well established. There are universities in French, there are magazines, newspapers, publishers, so I don't feel like English is so close or so powerful in our immediate surrounding, I would say.
All right. Nicolas, what do you think?
I agree with Dominique that on a day-to-day basis, we don't feel like we live in a minority. It has no sense, you know, on a day-to-day basis. But and I was discussing earlier with Dominique and Nadine whether we finally could find ourselves into this situation in minority whenever we try to extend our career outside of Quebec. And we weren't even sure whether it was the case or not. I think what I'm conscious of, and constantly, is not of living in a minority, but rather of living in a small place. I don't know whether it might look like a very Jesuitic distinction, but it is to me different. You know, I think every day, you know, I get to work about how small Quebec is for several reasons. For instance, there might be some specific genre projects I would like to write, but I won't write because I know that in the Quebec province there are about like 20 persons who will buy that book. So this idea of working for a small readership, the base readership is very small, is a constant preoccupation. But I don't think about it like being part of a minority. I think that's slightly different.
Okay. Teresa, what is your experience? You write in Catalan, you live in Barcelona. Do you have the same feeling about Barcelona that Nicolas has expressed about Quebec? What is it for you?
Well, in fact, Catalan is not a minority language if you compare with other languages like Norwegian, for instance. No? But the question is that Catalonia is a bilingual community, and all the Catalan speakers that has the Catalan like a mother tongue knows, understands, and speaks Spanish, but not all the Spanish speakers in Catalonia understand Catalan. So I think that we are not really a minority community in Catalonia, but we feel as we are a minority because this subject about the two languages that are in contact every day, Catalan and Spanish, is present on our society, and especially because there are a lot of tensions between the Spanish, not the Spanish language, but mainly the Spanish politicians, and the way they understand the difference. No? That they understand that Spain is a country with not only one language, but 4 languages. Spanish, but as well Galician, Basque, and Catalan.
Mykola, would you say the situation in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia and the Russian language is similar to what Teresa describes about Catalonia and Spain?
Yes, largely, not exactly the same, but very similar. Ukraine is not minority language, it's a language of at least 3/4 of population, and at least 2/3 of them claim it to be a native language. But it's a matter of social inequality, I would say, because historically Ukraine was forbidden, marginalized, and became, so to say, second-class, second-rate language. Language of rural community, of kolkhoz slaves. While Russian used to be more prestigious, it was, so to say, white language with a black language. So I would compare this in social categories.
Okay. And obviously, when we're talking about a marginalized language, I think that would certainly apply to French in Canada at some point. Nadine, what is your experience of that?
I would go in the same direction as Dominique and Nicolas. It doesn't really influence our daily work when we work on a daily basis, but it's when our books get translated and then go to other countries or Toronto, then you feel like Toronto being Canada, and so we feel like a minority, and because the French people, they treat us as a minority, even if we speak French, we're like petits cousins, and they treat us like strange creatures, not their equals. And so that's when I feel as a minority, but when I work, I don't.
And the writers, the three of you in Quebec are in a way double minorities, in that you are writing in French in Canada, but also outside France. Nicolas, how does that shape or inform your work, your relationship to, say, the greater French literature or literary culture?
I think that early in my career, I started to ignore France, just like France ignores us. You know, we've heard so many of those stories about Quebec movies being subtitled for the French market. Or I've heard so many times publishers in France, not readers, mind you, publishers, people from the industry, saying, oh, well, we would publish more Quebec literature, you know, but there's a language barrier. So very often there's this feeling that, yeah, we speak French, but it's a different flavor of French, and therefore there's some, you know, it's not totally compatible. And I think it's part of the reasons why it's so hard to get into the French market / readership, call it as you want. There's many other reasons, and it's true that we get published in France, but it's incredibly difficult to get attention in France. So yeah, I just decided I would work toward getting translated very early in my career. Although you don't decide I'm going to get translated, you've got to, you know, wait for the opportunity. But it was very early, I'd say almost 10 years ago, I decided that the English market should be more important for me than the French market. Outside of Quebec, of course, my base readership being Quebec, I will never write for outside of Quebec first. I still write for my base readership. But outside of Quebec, it's much more important for me to get translated, Jesus Christ, in German. It works better for me in German than in French. So, and it's also a matter of, you know, which publisher you get to work. So I'm not saying I'm a typical example of how it works, but you know, there's very few Quebecers who get a career in France, a real career, or even a real addendum to their Quebec career.
Dominique, you had mentioned when we were talking earlier that the government automatically provides funding for a translation from a Quebec work into English for a Canadian publisher, or almost? Okay.
But no, but they actually, you have to submit a request, but it's much easier in French Canada to translate English Canadian authors than American authors, and the same is true, is that if a Canadian publisher wishes to translate a Quebec author, he can get money from the federal government, and so the translation doesn't cost him a thing, actually, as if the work comes from France, he has to pay the translator. So this kind of helps, I think, relations between Quebec and the rest of Canada, and I love what you said about other countries and Toronto, because we really have the feeling that, well, I do, that Ontario and Toronto, where the big publishers are English Canada, it's kind of foreign for us. I don't know which France or Toronto is farther in my mind, but they're really both, yeah, foreign countries for me. Because I've grown up reading French books since I was like 5 years old. I was reading La Comtesse de Ségur, and I didn't know that it had been written in France 100 years ago. For me, it was a bit strange and weird looking just because it was in a book. So for me, just the language of literature always was a bit foreign, but that was the main characteristic of the thing.
Teresa, you translate your own books into Spanish. Do you generally publish the Spanish translation simultaneously with the Catalan or shortly thereafter? What is the usual publication schedule?
Well, if you write in Catalan or in Galician or in Basque, it's very difficult to find a publisher to publish your works in Spanish. So my novels are published in Spanish, but they appear later. But anyway, I would like to explain how difficult it is to write Catalan in the Spanish context, because I have readers in German, I have readers in Italy, in French, even in English, but I have a very little readers in Spanish. I mean, it's very difficult if you write in Catalan to get a publisher and to awake the interest of the readers. So I don't know if this was your question. Yeah.
And would you say that how crucial is publishing in Spanish to the success of your books, would you say?
Well, it is not really, because in my case I have been translated into other languages directly from Catalan. On the other hand, I think it's important to be translated into Spanish because Spanish is a big language, and even for foreign publishers, it's easy to read Spanish than Catalan. And on the other hand, because Spanish is a language that I also love because I am bilingual. I mean, I am bilingual Catalan and Spanish. So I think all the Catalan writers would like to have a more close relationship with our colleagues in Spanish. You know? And well, I hope that in the future maybe the situation will change, because now it's really amazing that the writers that are translated into German or Italian or are not still translated into Spanish, and it happened.
Mykola, Nicolas mentioned that he felt it was almost more important to be translated into German than into English. How crucial do you feel it is to be translated into Russian? You've been translated into 18 languages. Are there other languages that you feel are more important for the success of your books? For work?
No, for us it's also more important to be translated to German. I'm very surprised that Germany is a country #1 in terms of translation. Germany is not the biggest one, it's not as big as America, and probably not the richest country, but it's a country which translates the most. As to the Russian, basically they don't translate much from Ukrainian because I feel they have some sort of bias. Typically they have attitudes with Ukrainians like, Robinson Crusoe versus Friday. So as long as Friday recognizes superiority of Robinson, it's okay. Basically each Robinson Crusoe loves his Friday. But as long as Friday is obedient. As soon as Friday sees that, no, I'm not Friday, I'm Mykola Riabchuk, it's an unspeakable name, and this Friday is probably crazy. Either crazy and should be cured, or probably is influenced by some other Robinson, like American or Polish or German, which are also bad. So, of course, we have some contacts, and of course, many writers can translate themselves into Russian. And this is, of course, this is very strong temptation, because everybody who wants to be published in a higher circulation tries to translate or even to write in Russian. So we have a kind of division of labor. We have very good serious literature written in Ukrainian, and we have a lot of pulp fiction produced in Russian, because it's a common market, so to say. But I believe it might be the same in Catalonia. I think so. Good literature is in Ukrainian, pulp fiction is Russian.
And Freddie needs to get off the island to change his relationship to Robinson Crusoe. Nicola, how important, you've talked about the importance of being translated into English and into German. How does writing in French, or does it affect your writing? Does it inform your writing? Are you conscious as you're writing of writing in French for that relatively small market that you mentioned?
Not very much, but a little bit, for a simple reason. That since year 2000, mostly I've been reading most of my books in English. I'd say 2/3 of my books, of what I read, is in English, excluding the internet and stuff I read online, which probably makes it, almost doing 90%. And therefore, I very often, while writing, stumble upon this specific English word I would so much like to use, but there's no French equivalent, or I come up with the English word or an English syntax, and I have to correct myself all the time. So it's a bit annoying, but that's about it. That's my basic language. So,
Dominique, how much are you reading in English as opposed to reading in French, would you say?
I would say for pleasure, I read only in French, because I read only in English for my work, because I'm a translator also. So it ends up being maybe 50-50, but at very different times and for different reasons. What Nicolas says is a familiar experience for me too, because when I spent all day in English manuscript, at the end of the day when I try to write in French, sometimes the so perfect words come and they're in English, and that's not good. But I went to hear a former teacher of mine a few weeks ago called François Ricard, who just prepared the Pléiade edition of Milan Kundera's work. And he was talking about the fact that Kundera grew up in Czechoslovakia and started writing in Czech, and then moved to France and switched to French in the 1980s. And so people asked him, well, is he still Czech or is he French? And his answer to that question was, he's neither, he's a novelist. And I love that answer so much, because it may sound just like a smart word, but it's so true. Is that what I was trying to say earlier is that Post-Lighting said that the language of literature is the language of everyday, but it's not the same. So, of course, the language you use to write is important. The words you use are important, but there's such a thing that I feel as the language of literature.
And of course, Kundera has over the years replaced the English translations of his works in Czech with English translations from the French versions, which
yes, for him actually the French, he needed to have a version that would be understood by a large number of people, and so for him the French translation were actually the equivalent of what our English versions are for us. I mean, the translations that could be understood by lots of people, so they have the same value as the originals, I think.
Mykola, would you say that your primary references or your literary influences are from the great Ukrainian literature you realize, with perhaps a tad of the Russian pulp dropped in?
Well, basically, I grew up on foreign literature. When I was a teenager, my favorite reading was American science fiction, fantasy literature. We can read both Russian and Polish, because Ukrainian is in between, and at least Ukrainian intellectuals can read easily Polish. And I use 4 languages besides Ukrainian. Sometimes I can write in Russian, and I use this skill during Perestroika especially, because Moscow was much more liberal at the time. Sometimes I write also in Polish, and I can write these articles in English. But basically, from the very beginning, we had some sort of European myth. Ukraine can exist as long as it's Europe-oriented, because otherwise it would be absorbed by the big neighbor. It's like, sleeping in the bed with an elephant. This is not my formula. It's Pierre Trudeau put it some 40 years ago in Washington. He told that it's, to share this land mass with the big neighbor, it's like to sleep in bed with the elephant. So we have this elephant, and of course it's we should care about, all the time we should care about this elephant, and all the time we have to find some, some alternative, some symbolical alternative. And this alternative, since 19th century, was found somewhere in Europe. So Ukrainian literature is very, very Occidental, I would say. So of course we know Russian, we have many Russian friends and colleagues, but basically in genres, in style, even in the employment of a league, which is not very unusual in Russian tradition, Ukrainians are different. Yeah.
Teresa, is Spanish the elephant in the Catalan bed as well?
No, I don't think so, but I was 13 years old when Franco, the dictator, died. So that means that I studied at the school in Spanish, and then I learned to read and write Catalan at the university, despite that the language of my family is Catalan. So in Catalonia, there is a lot of people that speaks usually Catalan as a mother tongue, but that still don't know to, maybe not to read, but to write correctly. I think the relationship between Catalan and Spanish in Catalonia, or like in a city like Barcelona, that is the city that I live, it's different, because these 2 languages, Romanic languages both, that are in contact every day, they influence each other. So one of the things that I try to do in my novels is to reflect this not pure Catalan language that is spoken mainly in the streets, because there is an important gap, in my opinion, between the literary Catalan, the literary language, and the real Catalan that people spoke in the street. That is, it's a language with a lot of words or expressions in Spanish, or even translations into Catalan on expressions that are from Spanish origin. So I think that we as writers, we have to reflect the way that people real speaks. So it's what I try to do in my novel. On the other hand, I am very proud to be bilingual. So I think it's fantastic, to grow up in 2 languages, and I think it's a pity that in Spain, in my country, some people don't realize how fantastic, how good it is to be bilingual.
And in terms of growing up bilingual, Nadine, Dominique, Nicolas, did all of you grow up speaking English and French equally, or Nicolas, what was your experience?
Oh, purely French.
Purely French, and
and we start learning English 4 Or
many years.
in school and 10 years old, but it's kind of, you don't basically learn anything useful in the classroom. So I think I first started speaking English when I dated a girl from over here. Yeah, there you go. Love, always love.
Crossing the minority and majority border. Nadine, would you feel that, do you feel that your writing is sometimes informed not necessarily by actually living in this, we keep saying the minority environment, but not only living in a country where English is spoken, but also writing French, having read English?
I think so, yes, that my writing is informed by my readings, and I've studied in French literature. I've done a master in French literature, but when I read for my pleasure, it's mostly American writers or English writers, mostly dead writers, but
They are the most cooperative.
a few living writers I really learn from as well, but I really like the time gap and the classic quality, and to escape the modernity, and because my fiction is really inspired by modernity and daily life. So when I read, I like to try to go and see what's under the modernity, and that's universal and temporal. So that informs my writing.
Mykola, what about your writing in Russian, or your reading, excuse me, in Russian, as opposed to, say, Polish, for that matter? Which would you say has...
Reading or writing?
I would say, how has your reading in, say, Russian or Polish informed your writing in Ukrainian?
Well, still to say, of course, Russian was mandatory. It was compulsory. It was taught in school, actually much more intensive than Ukrainian. So, of course, everything that is mandatory is not very welcome, not very well perceived. Polish was not mandatory, but it was attractive because, you know, I grew up under communism. And Polish communist regime was much more liberal, much more flexible. And because of this, we could get a lot of good literature and translation also in Polish. Many books, many texts were forbidden in the Soviet Union, but they were available in Polish. Also, in western regions of the country, we could watch Polish TV. So again, it was another incentive to learn the language, which is very proximate, so it's not so difficult to learn. So I believe it was more important for me. It was a really window. It was a venue where through which world literature came in. I read a lot of Western writers in Polish translations.
And although you can, were you reading them in Polish translations, in translations from languages that you could, in which you could read the original?
No. You know, in the Soviet Union, learning of Western languages, of any foreign languages, was not necessary because it was a closed country. So it was like ancient Chinese. You could learn it just for fun. Mm-hmm. And I had some, basic English in school, but it was absolutely dead language in that country.
We'd like to think not, perhaps. We understand. I would ask all of you, do you think of yourselves, the Quebec writers first, do you think of yourselves as being part of a Quebec tradition? Do you think of yourselves as Canadian writers? Do you think of yourselves as part of the international French tradition? Dominique, where would you put yourself? Or what is, perhaps better to say, what is your relation? What do you feel your relation or your position vis-a-vis all three of those would be?
It's very difficult to answer because I don't like to look too closely at what I do for fear, I don't know, I might break it, or just look at yourself and try to figure out exactly where you fit. I'm not sure it's such a good idea. I feel Quebec literature has changed a lot in the last, I would say, 5 years, very recently. I think it has become much more open, much more diverse, more modern in a way, in a weird way, because there's, in what I do and what Nicolas do and a few others, a strange sort of return to the classics in sort of a way. But I'm definitely influenced by what's going on in France, as well as what's going on in the Anglo-Saxon world, as well as what's been written in the last 500 years. I feel like maybe nowadays what I read is also influenced by TV, because I think there's a lot of actually very talented people that write for TV, you know, and so it sort of has something to teach us, I think, in the ways of dialogue and building scenes and characters. But I don't know if it's because I'm a Quebecer or just because I'm a young writer, but I don't really feel like I belong either in Quebec nor in Canada nor in France. I'm somewhere. I feel like I belong with Kundera.
A novelist.
In the novel, yes, yes, I hope so.
Nadine, how about you?
I don't really think about this, although I'm a short story writer. I've written 2 short story books, so I know that my influences come from the United States, and like Carver really influenced my work. And I know that the short stories I've written wouldn't have been the same if I hadn't read Carver. But to situate myself in the Quebec tradition, or it's really hard. But I think my models are more Anglo-Saxon than French, because I think it's a matter of vision. The English writers are more concrete. They show their characters in action, and I think the French, they just, not the 19th century novelists, but the contemporary writers, they think too much. It's really, I read a book and I only see them thinking and going with theories, and I don't like that. I'd like to read about the character and to really believe that he's real, and that I've learned from the Anglo-Saxon. Like, yes.
Nicolas, would you agree? Would you say that most of your English language reading has been American as opposed to, say, Canadian English, certainly?
Not necessarily. Often reading in English has been a way for me to bypass the French, the translators from France. For instance, I read all Haruki Murakami in English because the Parisian slang was getting on my nerves. So sometimes it's just a way to, you know, to avoid the culture of France. But yeah, no, I come from all sorts of places, the English stuff I read. But mostly I read in English what has been written in English, usually.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you read, as a rule, would you say that in Quebec, obviously this is a generalization, but is the English language writing that is read predominantly Canadian English, American English, British English?
American.
Definitely American.
Twilight was written in the U.S., no?
Twilight?
Twilight?
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you don't ask me what I'm reading, just say what most people read in Quebec. It's going to be, it has been Harry Potter for a long time. It was from the UK, and then you've got Twilight, and then that's what people read.
Okay.
That's not what I read, but if you look at the mass of it, yes, it's not that they don't read it in English necessarily, but if they, if you look at what's read in English, that you will see the same titles as in French. When the last Harry Potter was published in English, the seventh book, it made the first position in the best-selling list in France in English. It had, beaten every title in French in its original version. So basically, if you look at what people read in English and people read in French in Quebec, the big thing will, eat, pray, love. What's that? Stuff like that. And you see that in Australia. You see that everywhere. That's the massive culture.
Mykola.
By the way, Harry Potter was published first in Ukrainian, faster than in Russian, and many Russians had to read it in Ukrainian. They complained, but they couldn't wait half a year.
And the latest Murakami has been published earlier in Spanish. We're still waiting for it in English, and I'm jealous because it's Spanish.
Teresa, what is the... I ask you the same question for Spanish literary culture, Castilian literary culture as opposed to Catalan. What is Catalan literary culture? What is the relationship of, say, the Spanish literary tradition? How does that influence contemporary Catalan writing?
You mean in my case, or?
Oh, in your case or in general?
Oh, okay. Well, in my case, I write crime fiction, but from a satirical point of view, because what I am trying to do is to describe, ironically, from a satirical point, my society. So I don't feel really related with Catalan authors, but especially with crime fiction Catalan authors. And on the other hand, like Nicolas, I grew up reading mainly foreign literature. And I think, and of course reading Spanish literature. And one of the authors that I think that influenced me was Manuel Vázquez Montalbán, that writes in Spain, but also the English, because I share with the English writers the sense of humor. And I think that in this moment is not a relationship between Spanish and Catalan literature. They live
Back to back.
Back to back. But on the other hand, the Spanish tradition is an important one, and I think that all the Catalan writers we know the Spanish tradition, but it's not the same. On the other hand, not all the Spanish writers know the Catalan tradition,
and certainly the strength of literary culture in Catalonia was reflected in the fact that Catalonia, as part of another country, was the guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is generally reserved either for entire countries or, as a few years before that, the Arab world, all of it. So it certainly indicates the strength of the Catalan, certainly the literary culture, and also the strength of the publishing industry there. Mykola, what is the situation of the publishing industry in Ukraine and Russia? How more publishers in Ukrainian? What is your sense of the strengths of the different publishing cultures and communities?
Well, first of all, the most important thing is that publishing is independent. Finally, it's the greatest achievement.
Yes.
Within 20 years, that writers can write whatever they want and publish whatever they want. The government doesn't care. It's a big deal. But we don't have really powerful publishing houses. There are a lot of them. They are small, and typically they start with 2,000 copies circulation, and then they can double if necessary. And because of this, as I told you, many writers who want to be commercially successful, they try to publish their books in Russian, and they often write in Russian. as to the serious writers, of course, they have other alternative venues. They are published either in Germany or in Poland. This is alternative way. So I don't know what can be next. Because everybody is minority language within this global world. The only global language, majority language is English. All other languages are minority languages, whether you like it or not.
Well, on that topic, how crucial is it for all of you for your work to be translated, not only translated into English, but published in the U.S.? Teresa, how important, I know you published with Israel Lemon in the UK. How important do you think English, having your work available in English in the U.S. is?
Well, if you write in a minority language, and Catalonia is Catalanese, it's very, very important to be translated into other languages in order to have more readers. And also because if they translate your works, the interest in your own country grows. Because one of the characteristics of the small countries is that we are very, very critics with ourselves. So sometimes we need to be the recognition of other readers for have recognition in your our country. On the other hand, I think that the translation, when a work is translated into other languages and interested other readers of other cultures, that means that the language is not so important. I mean, there are other things that are important, literature.
Again, that you are part of Kunderos's nationality, the novelist. And Nicolas, Dominique, Nadine, you all have English language Canadian publishers. How important do you feel it is to have your work available in English in the US? Nadine?
Well, I don't think it's available in the US. I think it's only available in English Canada, but of course it would be important for me, but I think my impression is that it would just get lost in the so much books that are published. So it would be nice to add on my resume, but I think that from another point of view, there's so many books published in the US that I think it would be a really hard work to make it really special to distinguish it.
So would you say that you feel your work gets more attention or more, that your work is better in a better place in a Canadian English language publisher where it can be promoted with as a Canadian work specifically?
Well, I think when it's
of course it's a translation.
Yes, it's a translation, but there's maybe more interest for English Canada to see what the young Quebec writers are, what kind of literature we're doing. I think that to present it in the US, it would take another, I don't like that word, but kind of branding or to present the book. It would need another kind of color, like from young writers from Quebec in the US. I don't think they would go like, it would need something else than just geographical or political.
Dominique, what do you think about Canadian English language publication as opposed to US?
Well, my book isn't available in the US either, so
would you agree with Nadine that it is?
She's probably right that if it didn't come accompanied with some kind of, I don't know what, it would get lost in the sheer mass of production. I've had an experience though that's kind of, I think, similar. We were talking about the fact that the only real majority language now is English. And I would add to that maybe pictures or movies, or because I'm not published in the US, but somebody actually bought the book to make a movie out of it. And that's the translation that everyone is talking about. That is like the big thing. That is so it's funny because movies are not a real language in my opinion. Well, they're a different sort of language. And that's certainly not going to be my movie, it's not going to be my book anymore. I don't even feel that the translation, the English translation is mine. I feel it's more of the translator's book. So it's going to be something else entirely, but that's an experience that kind of resembles.
So in a way, it would seem that we're talking not so much about not only about perhaps writing in a minority language, but with books writing in a minority form.
Language, yeah.
With book publication.
The written form is the minority.
This is more like a comment than a question. I think that there are like a couple of things that are hard with being a minority and writing in a minority language in a country. It's, one is very practical, has to do with style, like dialogue, for example, because like Teresa said, people, like in Finland, people speak Swedish with a heavy Finnish accent, and with heavy Finnish, lots of Finnish words. So if I would write that dialogue as it sounds, it wouldn't be understood in Sweden. And you have this clash of languages, and you have to make a choice. I have to write a Swedish that sounds more like Sweden, because otherwise I would have only 300,000 people who would be able to understand my book. So that's like one problem. And then there's like an existential problem, I think, that because if you're part of a minority, you're always part of sort of like language politics.
Yes.
And should that be in the book or not? Should the book have these topics in them? Like if you even name, if you have a character and he meets another character who speaks another language, it immediately becomes political in some sense. And for me that has been a sort of, because I really don't want to write about those things. I want to write about daily life. So it becomes hard because, and when I've been writing now a short story collection, I had to just mix up everything so that people are not really like their cultural identity is not the main issue, and there's sort of somebody you don't really know if they're Swedish speaking or Finnish speaking because the book is going to be translated into Finnish. So I knew from the beginning that I had to do this. Well, this is there are some practical problems I think at least, and then this whole political thing, that should it be part of the identity thing, should it be part of the book or not?
How does that does that manifest in your work, Mykola? Does this issue of the politics of Ukrainian versus Russian manifest in your works, or?
Well, in Ukraine, both languages are comprehensive, so people can understand both languages. We don't have this problem with incomprehension. It's not a problem of symbolical dominance, who is the master, who is majority, who is minority.
Robinson Crusoe and Friday.
Very ambiguous issue, yes. But in this regard, I can refer to another very interesting phenomenon, which was very characteristic for the Soviet times. Many people in Ukraine at that time, and still today, but especially in the Soviet times, spoke, especially common people, less educated people, they spoke mixture of both languages, which was sign of low culture. Of course, it was a transitional phenomenon from Ukrainian was Russian. People got urbanized and Russified. What is interesting is that official censorship did not allow Ukrainian writers to use this mixed language in dialogues. Probably because it reveals the fact of Russification, which was officially denied. Interesting is that in Russian text, Russian writers could use it. I can explain this by very simple political phenomenon. When this poor language is used by a Russian writer, it's exposed vis-a-vis normal language, and normal standard language is Russian. So there is very good opportunity to ridicule this sujuk as something, unserious. When it's used by Ukrainian writer, it's exposed, it's contrasted with normal standard Ukrainian. So in this case, it can be a political message of absolutely different political message. Of course, today we don't have this problem, and writers can use it and can play with both languages. Very, very, very good opportunity to use these things. And I don't think that it's so. Referring to your answer question, it's not so bad actually to have footnotes. Actually, Leo Tolstoy wrote his War and Peace entire pages in French. Today it's incomprehensible, and Russian published Leo Tolstoy with big footnotes. So what?
Yeah, there's actually that point also that some Swedish-speaking Finns can use the exoticness of their type of writing, and it can be an advantage. It's sort of, you know, it can be both ways, but it can also be a problem.
Yes. Yes.
I speak only as a reader, the one who loves it very much. I've read some books, including Primo Levi, I just happened to be reading, and he flows from one language to another and asks the reader to go with him, for which I turn to my Google Translate and get some sort of sense of what he's saying. Of course, I read very few languages, like in American. But, you know, I don't know why today, with perhaps a little bit less politics, people don't allow themselves a little more latitude and assume that the reader will go the extra mile to like try and figure it out a little bit. Even, especially the people who are thinking, like Kundera, in their own novel language, what would happen?
Teresa? I think a number of those decisions we can place not necessarily with the author, but with the publisher. I think, again, the question of accessibility, not because of complexity of content, but of combination of language. Again, looking at the, you know, considering the audience and expanding that as much as possible. Obviously, not to deny your point. But, yes.
You're all writing from cultural specificity, a lot of which has to do with the language of chosen writing. Do you feel that when your works are translated, this cultural specificity carries over, or does it get lost in translation?
I, for one, have been writing from a Montreal point of view for most of my career, and my translator is from Montreal and knows very well this place, and he's been translating the spirit of my book without a problem. I don't know if it would have been the same with translator coming from another country, but since he lived in Montreal, there was flawless.
It was lost.
No, it was not flawless. Sorry, it was perfectly. I read his translations like if they were my own text.
My translator is also from Montreal, and my first novel was actually about the Franklin expedition. So English explorers from the 19th century going to climb the Northwest Passage. And when Sheila Fishman did a wonderful job translating the text in English, gave me the first pages of it's a journal written by one of the characters. My boyfriend, who was there, just looked at it and said, "Oh, it's better than it was in French." Because he felt that actually the characters would have spoken in English because they were English. So my French original version looked to him like the translation. So I don't know what that's worth, but that was an interesting comment. Thanks.
Fascinating. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Teresa.
No, I would say that, well, I think the work of a good translator is just to communicate to the reader, not exactly the questions, but this flavor. But of course, this, specifically in language, these differences disappear in translation. But the translator can give this flavor, the cultural difference.
And there also could be the advantage of translating from the minority language in one's country to the majority language, where there would be perhaps, obviously, some cultural slippage, but perhaps not so much as there would be in going between other languages or countries or cultures. Yes?
Has anybody been translated Chinese? Like Mark?
Lots of bootlegging, I've heard. What I've read in a novel, what's his name? Oh, I forgot. And since it comes from a novel, I'm not sure whether it's reliable or not. But it felt like it was, you know, how it happened. Editors started a small. They published like 2,000 copies, and then it gets popular. And by the time they get to reprint it, it's, you know, so much bootlegged power in copy that it's not worth doing on the second edition, second reprint, official reprint.
And has the Arab world had any impact on
Not yet. But you know, Chinese market is big, but they do not observe copyright. So
in the middle back there.
Hi, I have a question actually more about the content than the language, which are connected. Do you, in your writing, do you feel the conflict between staying loyal to your locality, preserving its culture, to preserving its tradition, the language, versus talking about more universal things? For example, in the US, any Jewish writer is expected to relate in some way to Jewish matters. Do you feel that pull between being loyal to that's specifically the question to the Ukraine and maybe Catalonia, to the culture, or do you feel freedom to address more universal subjects?
Well, in my case, I'm loyal because I write Catalan, but on the other hand, I am very critical with my society from inside. And I think the kind of critics that I make are not to the Catalan specificity, but to things that share many other countries in our societies, no? Like injustice, power, and so on. And well, I think that writers, we have to be loyal to our beliefs.
Yes.
Beliefs. So.
Yes. Yes.
So I have two questions. The first one is about, I should say, I'm from the other country, Toronto. Hi. But I'm also one of these rare foreigners, I guess, who grew up speaking French at school. I went to a French school. And something that really struck me is how difficult it is to find Québec literature in Toronto, unless you go to a specialty store. And throughout my entire education, none of the required texts were of Québécois. Okay? So that's something that seems to be a strange dichotomy, because obviously French language literature in Quebec is supported by the government quite heavily. And so is French education in Ontario. And there's about 20% of Ontarians that do speak French. So there's this issue, and I would like you guys to address that from an insider's perspective. And second, I'm a political scientist, and this panel seems more like the politics of nationhood, rather than the politics of language. My question is, do you see yourself, actually, this language issue is a proxy for nation? And very important national questions in each of these places, or identity, nation, identity questions, revolve around the use of language and the promotion of language and the support of these languages. And I'd like the panel to speak to that.
As for your experience in school, I don't remember exactly what I had to read when I was in school, but I'm pretty sure we didn't have any English-speaking Canadian authors either. So I think we're pretty much two separate countries from that point of view. I think so. I remember Anibert and Gabriel Roy and Michel Tremblay, but I don't remember Margaret Atwood or Monica Richter. I don't think so. And as for the little small number of Québécois books, there are not that many Ontarian publishers that actually read French. So the number of
there may be 1 or 2 or 3 in the big houses, I don't know. So the number of translation is kind of limited by that.
So in that respect, Quebec writing in French is almost no different from writing in German or writing in Italian, in that there are not editors at the English language publishers who can read the languages.
There are not that many, that's for sure.
Were you talking about the availability of the text in French or in translation?
Oh, in French, yeah.
Oh, therefore, it's basically a matter of money and business. The market is just too small to make deals with the distributors, I guess, and that's basically it about it. That's the same reason why I think Quebec literature. If you write a book in Quebec in French and you want to get distributed in France, you've got no choice but to find a publisher in France to republish your book, because almost no publishers in Quebec get their book seriously distributed in France. About like 2 or 3 small publishers. So that's basically a matter of market and money.
Well, the issue is that bookstores in Toronto that do have, and actually it's foreign language literature, as most of these bookstores would be called, that have French language books, predominantly have French language books from outside of Canada. So that is an interesting conundrum.
Geez, those French people are powerful.
Yes, David.
Yes, I'm mainly directed at the Quebecois writers. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the category of Francophone literature from outside of France. I mean, and to what extent that category feels like a real category from your perspective. I mean, on the one hand, French departments at universities have tried to become more inclusive by having more and more courses, more supporting interest in in Quebecois literature, in French literature from the Caribbean, and Francophone North African literature. But on the other hand, it's coming from the idea where there's France is the center and everything is outside. And is there any sense of commonality that is felt among writers from Quebec, from Montreal, that you have something in common with writers who write in French from the Caribbean, from North Africa? Are those writers being read with any particular interest, say in Quebec, and vice versa?
This category of Francophone literature is quite recent, and from my point of view, what I've experienced from it, it's something that's been created by the French to include us, but at the same time exclude us. Like they're gonna talk about us like Francophone literature, and that justify that we're not French. So it's like they don't feel guilty anymore, or it's politically correct, but at the same time, you feel excluded. And because for me, Francophone literature, it has to be exotic, or it has to be like something particular, but it's not French, it's Francophone. So it means like you're gonna read French, but it's kind of a weird French. So I think and I've talked about this category as well with French writers who are living in France and established writers, but this particular one was from Morocco, and he was feeling totally excluded. But he had won the Goncourt like 10 years ago, but it's really a category that I don't think Francophone would have came out with. It's really the French, and it's a way to talk about us and to include us, but keep us at a certain distance as well. So, and I think and I think everybody will agree here, is that you don't want to be considered as a Quebec writer, or as a Francophone writer, or as a Ukrainian, or you just want to be considered as as a writer, and that's all. And that's what as a reader, that's what I'm looking for as well. Like when I discover a writer, it's not where's he from or what's his original publication language, or I'm looking for a particular point of view on the world that only literature can give us. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up now. Thank you to the panel, Nadine Bismuth, Dominique Fortier, Nicolas Riabchuk, Nicolas Dickner, and Teresa Solana. Thank you for coming. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors for the event, the Blue Metropolis Festival in Québec, in Montreal, and also the Scandinavian House. I will also mention that our current April issue of Words Without Borders focuses on contemporary literature from Quebec and includes stories by Nicolas, Dominique, and Nadine, as well as 6 other pieces by Quebec prose writers and poets. Future issues on Words Without Borders will include our next month's issue of Writing from Afghanistan, and also our October issue, Writing from Iceland. So thank you very much for coming out. We hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you.